Let's start our conversation on Playmaker and iOS devices by talking about orientation of these devices. These devices have an orientation event. That means it tells us what the device's orientation is. iPads, iPhones, all these mobile devices know what their orientation is at any given time. They know which way they're facing in the world, whether they're upside down or not, that sort of thing. And if we ask it, it'll tell us what it is, and we can use that information to make intelligent decisions about how our game's working. Traditionally, you'd use this depending on how the player is holding the device. If they flip it around, maybe they want the button on the other side or the volume controls, so they turn it upside down. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about orientation events for most games. If you're doing alternate or augmented reality games, things like that, this might be much more important depending on which way you're facing. Let's start by taking a quick look at what these orientation events really are. The first orientation we should talk about is portrait, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. It's as if you're holding your, in this case, iPad, as if you're holding the iPad as if you're reading a book. So the top is facing up, and the button is facing down on the bottom, and you'd be holding it straight out in front of you. The top of the device is what determines the orientation of any of these other positions. So if you ever wonder or get confused, or you think you might in the future, just use the top as your memory device for figuring out which way the device is really pointing. The second orientation is portrait upside down, and that has the top pointing down and the button on the top just inverted from portrait. Orientation landscape flips it on its side, and this is one that we play, I think, most of our games in usually. This has the top on the right, which is why we call it landscape right. If you're like me, you'll make the mistake right away of thinking, well, the button is probably what determines it, so this is landscape left. No, it's not. We're talking about the top of the device to determine what the orientation is, so landscape right. And it stands to reason. Landscape left is going to have the top on the left and the button on the right. Now there's two more. Orientations face up, which has the screen as if you'd set it flat on a desk and the screen is pointing straight up away from the world into the sky. And orientation face down, which is just the opposite, as if you'd laid your screen face down on a table. Please do not lay your mobile device screen face down on a table. That is how you scratch it up and ensure that you have to go get a new mobile device. Now, the last orientation event is an unknown orientation. And this may seem a little strange, like, well, what? This is kind of strange. But really, if it's not in one of these other six, it's definitely still in some kind of orientation. And it's important to report that because you may only want to do things, for instance, in landscape orientations, left and right. And you may not want it to do anything else. Unknown orientation is when you've got your iPad all at an angle, or you're holding your phone in maybe it's, in some jangy, weird position that isn't really usable probably, or you're holding it sideways to show somebody else, and maybe you've seen an APRA, a game that kind of goes wonky when you're holding it all screwy, trying to show your friend and leaning over. And that's what's going on. It's in unknown orientation, and the app is saying, hang on, let me adjust for this. So it's pretty easy to get the information for that and do something with it. Let me show you how. I'm going to add an FSM here, just as an example. And if we look at our actions, I would typically just search here for the word orientation, and it would pop up all my options. But since this is our first example, I want to scroll down and show you the category device. If you haven't explored this yet, this is where a lot of the good stuff is going to happen. And I'm going to work my way through these in upcoming examples, but let's start right here at the top, device orientation event. This is really the one we want to start with. Go ahead and add that to my state. And looking in orientation, if I pop this up, it has those same 7 orientations I just talked about. These aren't made up by Playmaker or even Unity. These are Apple-specific orientation events. And I don't know for positive on other mobile devices, but they're definitely in the same general range of orientations because they're all the same form factor. You choose which one you would like to listen for, portrait, landscape, left, whatever, So I want to know, did my device shift into landscape left? And if it does, send this event. You can check it every frame or not, depending on your needs. And so this looks very much like other Playmaker actions. Let me step out of this and get rid of my example object, and I will show you a more complex setup for this that checks all 7 orientations. And what I have is a really, really cheesy, simple thing. I really suggest when you first start working with stuff like this, just check it with GUI text. Just check it with text. Make sure you get the basic info from the device the way you need it at the time you need it, and then add your complex things like moving objects and all of that. This way, you can be absolutely sure you're getting what you need when you need it, and any bug fixing is going to be a lot easier. So in this case, I just pop up, here, let me do a full screen. I just pop up a button that says Get Orientation, and that's what it does. It checks for the current orientation, and then it will update the text and change the background color from this delightful default blue that we have here. So let's look at the wiring for that. I put it all right here on the GUI text object. And pretty easy. We flow into a start state, and I've got a GUI button, and it just waits to be pressed, and when it does, it sends this Get Orientation event, which fires right here into the orientation check state. And you can see here I've got 7, right down the line, 7 of these devices, or actions, to check device orientation event, just like we looked at. And I've chosen each one specifically. So if it's an unknown orientation, fire off the unknown event, which is right here. If it's a portrait, then fire off the portrait event. And that would send us right up here. And so on down the line. There's one for each one. Portrait upside down. There's landscape left. There's landscape right. Oh, and you can see I've got a problem, don't I? Because I'm sending them all to portrait. So I'll have to update that in a second. Face up, and last one there, face down. So let's choose, there's face down, there's face up. That's good that we caught that before we tried to look at it. So landscape right, landscape left, and portrait upside down. I got that right. And portrait, that's good, and unknown is unknown. Okay, so now those are all set up. Let's take a look at what they do. I just copied each one of these. They're really easy. Once it gets, let's say it triggers off the portrait event. Once it gets to this state, I just do a GUI text update. And I use the owner, which is why I just made it easy. It's why I put all the rigging here on this GUI text object. And so I change the text to say portrait, whatever the name of the state is. And then I change the background color. And I picked some pretty garish colors to just really, really be obvious that the thing had changed. And I don't do any of this every frame, just do it once, and when we're done, we, on finish, flow right back in and wait for the button to be pressed again. So it's the same for every one of these. Like here's unknown for the unknown event with another crazy color, and so on down the line. Each one of these has its own color. Nice and easy, not much to it, but that's enough to check what the orientation is of the device and output depending on what it is. And if we look right here at the button, if I press it, it fires through the unknown state and shows me that it's unknown, and we get this tremendously crazy color. And this is what I expect because I'm running it not on a mobile device. You're seeing this run on an iMac, and I don't know what orientation this is, man. You're an iMac. You don't have the orientations. So that is indeed an appropriate response. Let's take a look at how this runs on an iPad. Here's the app running on my iPad 1, and you can see that it's in landscape right currently because the button's over here and the top's over there. And I can rotate it into portrait, landscape left, and portrait upside down, and the UI, you can see, flips with each rotation. So that's the hardware flipping it around, and I've got the player settings in Unity set up to allow all those rotations. So we should be able to press our magic button here and check all the rotations and get the color change and the text update feedback. So let's try it here in landscape right. And there it says landscape right, so we got the right feedback. Rotate to portrait, check the button again, and we're getting the right feedback. Portrait left, there we go. Sorry, landscape left, and portrait upside down. And there we go. Okay, Now, not to be forgotten, remember we also have face up. So try that, and yeah, we did indeed get a change there. And if we flip it upside down, let's see if I can hit the button while it's upside down. That's the tricky part. And there we go. There's a word color for that one. And if I can get a strange, thinks it's landscape, right? So it's a little strange to get it in one of those unknown positions, but generally, if you can find one of those bizarre ones, it'll catch you there. See, it switches around pretty easy, but there you go. That is how to do quick checks for orientations.